This is FightFans Radio.
Let's get ready to rumble! Oh my God! Unbelievable! Down goes Frazier! And down goes Frazier!
It's time! You're listening to New Mexico's only mixed martial arts and boxing podcast, The Low Blow, on AdamCombatSports.com and FightFans Radio. It is another episode of The Low Blow on a busy day in combat sports news. I am Justin Goodrum, joined by the returning Jorge Hernandez. What's up, man? Welcome back.
What's going on, man? Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back in this clean air. Not saying that I didn't have a good time in New York, but it stinks, man. It's stinky up there.
So you're saying very smoky. A lot of smokers up in New York.
Well, I mean, just it's a dirty town, but it's a fun town. I enjoyed my time. I'll definitely go back.
Right on. Today we have a lot to discuss, so I'm going to get all the housekeeping things out of the way. You can get in touch with FightFans Radio, where we're housed on our network through hashtag FightFans Radio, through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Ustream that has our show along with all their other content. Please check that out. Our email is lowblow505@gmail.com. We are on Twitter through @TheLowBlow, on Facebook through the LowBlow Podcasts, and we're also on Stitcher too. Just type in LowBlow Podcast. We're on there. Today we're going to break down really a big time, 24 hours in combat sports, both boxing and MMA, both locally and nationally. But first, we have a special guest.
Yes, we're lucky to have Matthew Baca, boxer out of Albuquerque, 1-0. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me.
Our pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on. So tomorrow you'll be in your second career fight on the Holm versus Diana Prazic fight at the Route 66 Casino. Today were the weigh-ins. How did the weigh-ins go, man?
They went great. Right on weight. Happy to finally weigh in and see my opponent, and I'm ready for tomorrow night.
And now it's been a year since you were last in action. It was December of last year, right, where you made your professional debut?
Yeah, right.
What's that been like, just to be waiting this whole time? Because you actually, I think you were forced out for a little bit with a nose injury that you had surgery on. So, are you pretty excited on getting back into action?
Yeah, I'm pumped. It was rough not being in the ring for a whole year, but now it's finally time, and I'm more than ready, and I'm excited to be back.
Now, how much do you know about your opponent, Derek Perez? I believe he's fighting out of Belen. He's actually an MMA fighter. So is there too much that you know about him? Did you ever see him fight as an amateur here locally?
No, never got to see him fight. All I know is that he has 3 MMA fights and that he's a southpaw, and that's about it.
Okay, excellent. And again, you're with another Holm card, and during, I guess what you can say was your off season, during your inactivity, you actually signed as another fighter for Fresquez Productions, who actually promotes Holm. What's that like to be the only other fighter under the same promotion who promotes the best female fighter in the world, man?
It's great. I feel very happy, and I feel blessed just to be signed with Mr. Fresquez, and I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of your amateur background, man. How many fights did you actually have, and what made you finally go pro? Because you turned pro as soon as you turned 18, right?
Yes. I've always had the pro style. I had over 50 amateur fights, and it was just time to turn pro. I wasn't getting anywhere anymore in the amateurs, and I've always had the pro style, and it was just time to turn pro.
Whenever Holm fights, she packs the house there at the Route 66 Casino, so you're there with a little over 3,000 people. How did that feel to be, probably fighting in the biggest crowd, in front of the biggest crowd you had ever fought in front of last year, man?
Oh, it felt great. I lived off the crowd. It was an amazing moment, a proud moment, and I'm happy to be fighting again on a big card, like Holm's card.
Yeah. Now, Derek Perez, as we mentioned, the weigh-ins were today. What was that like to be face-to-face with him? Was there any smack talking between the two of you guys?
No, just respect, but it's a fight, and I'm in there to get the W no matter what it takes. So it felt good to finally see him. It's been 3 months of hard training, and tomorrow night. It's finally going to happen.
And now you bring up the training. Tell us about where you actually train, because it's not the, I guess, traditional, I train out of this gym. It's actually a home gym that you're based out of. So who's helping you out there, and, what kind of training regimen do you actually have at your home gym?
Yeah, I have my own gym out of my house. My dad, David Baca, he's been my trainer since I first started, and now we're lucky to have Luis Chavez along, and we're in great shape. We're ready for this fight. We train hard every day, and it's finally time.
Now, the podcast that we have here is actually broadcasted pretty much everywhere. So for people who don't know who Mr. Chavez is, tell us a little bit about him.
Luis Chavez, he's well known here in New Mexico. He helped train Danny Romero in all of his championship fights, well, a couple of them. And he's just well known. He knows the game very well. I see him as a legend here, and I'm very thankful to have him and feel very blessed.
Has it been frustrating having all this time off, man?
Yeah, it has. It's just, but I see it now. It's like God has a plan, and now it's my time, and I'm just happy to be back in the ring now. Yeah. Friday night.
And, Friday night, I mean, it's a pretty big night with Diana Prazic and Holly Holm. It's a pretty big card with Hollywood, Ray Montes, and Tony Valdez. Did you see their first fight by any chance?
No, I didn't get to. I heard lots of people talking about it, though. So
yeah.
a lot of people pumped up.
Yeah, most people say that it was the fight of the year for New Mexico boxing. So you're on a pretty stacked card there, man. But do you have a message to any of your fans or any friends listening out there?
Yeah, I just want to thank all my fans, friends, and family for all the support. And Friday night we're going to shine, and I just want to thank everyone for all their support and everything.
Yeah. Now, if people want to follow you, where can they follow you online?
Follow me on Facebook at Matthew Baca, and on Twitter, Matthew Champ Baca.
Champ Baca. All right, man. Well, best of luck tomorrow night. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
He's
a good
Matt kid, man.
Yeah, he is. Very, very mature.
Yeah, it started off young. As soon as he turned 18, that guy was gone, and he said, I'm going to the pros. The interesting thing about him is that he's training full-time, man. He doesn't have, this side job. This guy is definitely just dedicating himself to this. And his father, David Baca, is strongly backing him, and also there with Luis Chavez assisting in the training. He's got a pretty good, pretty good stepping stones there to build a pretty good, promising career. And not to mention, he's got the backing of Fresquez Production, so that doesn't hurt at all, man.
Absolutely. Do you think how active do you see him being in 2013?
He has
injury.
He has to be a lot active. Usually when you see professional boxers go pro in their pro year, they're fighting, 4, 5, 6 times a year. So I expect him from this point to next year. He unfortunately only had one fight in the past year. I see him fighting maybe 5, 6 times within the next 12 months, man. And it's something that he needs. It's just to build up. He's a light welterweight, to build some confidence, and we can definitely expect him to see on a lot of shows here locally.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, he is fighting on the undercard of another big Holly Holm fight. She's big in our neck of the woods in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I think all across the world. I think she's not just a local attraction. Holly Holm will face Diana Perez tomorrow at the Route 66 Casino, a little bit outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I think you kind of have to agree with me, Jorge, that this fight is not really getting the headlines within the last couple of days here. Instead, it is a video made by Cecilia Brækhus, just calling Holly Holm out. Can you describe this video, and really what does this do for this fight? Does this overshadow Diana Perez? I mean, is it like, let's see Holly Holm beat Diana and let's move on to possibly see the Brækhus fight? Or do you see this as just a minor distraction? And how do you think this video is going to play into the actual fight tomorrow night?
You know what? I think it's just a complete afterthought for Holly Holm. Recently, I had a chance to interview her last week, and she said she hasn't even bothered to watch the Cecilia Brækhus and Sophie Matisse fight. Of course, the other two best female fighters in the world. Holm has split 2 fights with Anne-Sophie Matisse. She says she hasn't even seen that fight. So I seriously doubt she's even watched this video. And, the presser is over. The presser happened on Wednesday. Then Thursday you had weigh-ins where you don't really get to interview the fighter too much. And if she was asked about it, I'm not sure. I didn't make the weigh-in today. But I honestly think it's an afterthought, and she'll actually we'll worry about it afterward. Now, in the video, let's go back to that.
Sure.
Cecilia Brækhus, very good-looking woman that fights fights out of Europe. She's just a little bit of background on Cecilia Brækhus. She is of Colombian descent. She was adopted by a family there in Sweden, I believe, and that's where she was actually raised. So basically, she's European at heart, I guess you can say. She's very talented. One of the, probably her and Holly are the two best female fighters in the world. They've kind of been dancing around each other for the past year and a half. A lot of people feel that it's because of Holm's reluctancy to leave the state, but I mean, she makes good money here. She's got a contract with the casino that she's at, so she can't really just travel as she'd like. But Cecilia Brækhus has been traveling Europe and just beating people up. She's 21-0, but only has 5 knockouts. She did some serious damage to Anne-Sophie Matisse in their September fight. She currently holds, get this, the WBA, WBO, WBC female welterweight championships of the world. So
wow.
She is pretty loaded when it comes to being, I guess, with all the accolades that a fighter can possibly receive. And I beg your pardon, it's Norway, not Sweden. I misspoke there. So, I mean, it'd be a huge fight. In the video, she pretty much tells Holm, all right, let's do it. The public wants it. The fans want it. So let's do it. And Cecilia Brækhus also even gives a date. Well, not necessarily a specific date, but a month of July in Las Vegas. She says, I'll be in Las Vegas. Let's do it then. All the fans want it. So it's pretty big. This is, the female equivalent of a super fight. This will be as super as fights can possibly get, and it would be, just talent-wise, the greatest fight in female boxing history.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to that with the Brækhus, absolutely, but I don't want to kind of disrespect Diana Prazak. She's a late replacement. I was looking over her record here. She's 11-1. This fight tomorrow, and it's going to be for the vacant International Boxing Association female light welterweight title and the World Boxing Federation WBF female light welterweight title, according to BoxRec.com. Is this fight going to be competitive, Jorge, or do you see this as Holly Holm kind of rolling over Diana to set up a bigger fight later on, whether it's with Brækhus or not?
Well, here's the thing. Myriam Lamar out of France was originally supposed to fight Holly Holm. Myriam had to pull out due to a shoulder injury about 3 weeks ago. Diana Prazak was supposed to be on the undercard to fight Victoria Cisneros in her first light welterweight fight. So she's moving up from super featherweight to light welterweight. And what a movement up it is to fight one of the best female fighters in the world in Holly Holm. Holly, last fight was at welterweight, but most of her career has been at light welterweight. So it's at a weight she feels comfortable in. Should we think that it's an overwhelming mismatch? I'm not so sure. Myriam Lamar had previously fought Holly Holm. Myriam Lamar is trained by Lucia Riker, who's hands down right now the greatest female fighter of all time. And in my opinion, and I don't even think it should be questioned, that she's the greatest female fighter of all time. 37-0 kickboxing, 17-0 boxing. She's the greatest. I
think a lot of people agree with you with that. Even Dana White, I've heard MMA, all kinds of combat sports personalities say the same thing.
So basically, she trained Myriam Lamar in the first fight. She was training Myriam Lamar for the second fight. And Diana Prazak is also her fighter. So I think the competitor in Lucia Riker still exists, and she wants to beat Holly Holm some way. Even though she can't do it, she's 44 now, obviously retired. She wants, at least her disciple, if you will, to actually be the one to beat her. And so people shouldn't question Diana Prazak out just because of who is actually training her. And Prazak may be 11-1, but she's a world champion at super featherweight level. And she also is on an 11-fight win streak. Her first loss was the first fight of her career. So she's really developed since her first fight. So especially with the calling out by Cecilia Brækhus, I think people are very intrigued in this fight to see how a smaller Prazak does against Holm and how Holm now reacts in the ring knowing that Cecilia Brækhus is actually calling her out.
Mm-hmm. So I guess let's get to the main point here, Jorge. I want to ask you this. We were talking about this before we got on the air. It seems like Holly Holm has two choices, especially with the breaking news, which we're going to get to in a second, with Ronda Rousey, with her headlining a pay-per-view in February. It seems on one hand you have the Cecilia Brækhus fight, Anne-Sophie Matisse, and on the other hand it seems like there's this MMA career that has a lot of potential. She's with Mike Winklejohn. She's associated with Jackson's MMA. She has, I believe, 2 MMA fights under her belt, if I'm not mistaken. It seems like she has some momentum on the mixed martial arts side. It seems like there's 2 avenues for her to perhaps make a lot of money. I mean, fighting, you don't fight forever. I mean, it's not basketball where you can play for 20 years. In fighting, you only have a short window to make as much money as possible and to really make a legacy in your particular sport. So it seems like with either choice, it seems like Holly has a bright future. But the problem is, it seems like there's a possibility for her not to pick either of them because of this her association with, like you were saying, Jorge, with Route 66 Casino. So what do you think Holly should do? I mean, that's kind of a bizarre question, just trying to play, kind of career matchmaker for Holly Holm's career. But where do you see her going from here? I mean, it's going to be virtually impossible to get these big names to just come to Albuquerque. She's going to have to leave. But at the same time, if she does pursue this MMA career, it seems like she's going to have to leave her boxing legacy behind. So what do you think is going to happen here?
Completely, agree with what you're saying. And I just think that, by all means, more power to her for signing, I guess, a contract. It's money that's going to come in. It's money that it's going to continue to trickle in. So by all means, feel free to sign that contract. But when it comes to fighting the best, she'll eventually have to leave the state. Not everyone's going to come here, especially when you have a name as big as Cecilia Brækhus internationally and there in Europe. I was out in New York, and it surprised me that people didn't know Cecilia Brækhus' name as much as they did Holly Holm's name. So it must be the factor there, obviously. But I think a lot of people actually do want to see this fight, and it doesn't matter where it actually happens, whether it's in Albuquerque, whether it's in Las Vegas, whether it's in Germany somewhere. It's they can meet somewhere with. I mean, I guess the ground can be neutral, but for Holm, I think I don't know how many fights she has in her contract with Route 66. But I think when she's considering the jump over to the UFC, if it does indeed happen, I mean, she's 2-0 with 2 knockouts, and it will be hands down best the best boxer in MMA. She does, transfer completely over to the sport. I think she can go 2 different ways. Maybe go with Brækhus when she's ready to just finish with boxing and go MMA full time. Will she continue doing both, boxing and MMA? I find it difficult to believe that she'd actually do that because the competition in both is just going to increase, if that makes sense. So, as she can be 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, she's going to have to fight better fighters in MMA, and that's going to be difficult to be at the top of the sport in each divisions. I mean, for example, 2012, she didn't have one single MMA fight.
You're right.
She had the fight last December with Brækhus where she suffered a vicious knockout that went viral. Then she fought her again in the middle of this year where she boxed beautifully in what people say was a boring fight, but it was a smart fight for her to win. She pulled that off. Now she's going on Diana Prasic. That's 3-0, 3 fights, no MMA fights. So I think if she's going to balance the 2 of them, it's hard just because of the caliber opponents she's going to have to start facing in boxing and then later in MMA. I mean, she can't continue to fight the 1-4s or even the 2 and the 5 and 9s in MMA. She's going to have to go for these other fighters who have better records. But if she continues her contract with Route 66 Casino, she might be able to do both and bring subpar opponents from MMA because she's going to sell out the house either way, man.
Yeah, you just see so much potential there, and it's just I don't know, it's kind of unfortunate. But to segue, some breaking news got broke today on really the UFC on Fox press conference. Really, it was supposed to be Rory McDonald and BJ Penn and Ben Henderson and Nate Diaz's time in the sun, and we'll break down that card later on. But some breaking news with Ronda Rousey. Dana, brought out the belt in the beginning, and everybody was kind of wondering, why do you bring out another championship title? Because, Ben Henderson had his, and Ariel questioned him about it. And later on in the press conference, he brought out Ronda Rousey and awarded Ronda Rousey the 135-pound women's championship of the UFC and announced that she will face Liz Carmouche at the UFC 157 in Anaheim, California. So in terms of Ronda and Liz Carmouche, you texted me saying, Jorge, you like this fight a lot. I do too. And there's a lot of discussion as to, having Ronda Rousey fight Cyborg Christine Santos at UFC 157, but Cyborg didn't want to cut the weight. But I think I like this fight a little bit better because you introduce Ronda Rousey to a new audience. You get to build that Cyborg fight. And honestly, I'm skeptical Cyborg can make 135, and maybe you can give time to have Cyborg maybe take a fight and see if she can make the weight. Because I guess, especially with the women, especially, how MMA fans are going to see, Cyborg struggling on the scale, and you have the haters, and you have all these people that honestly don't know what they're talking about. And it could be a lot of bad publicity that, the UFC will unfortunately get if, in fact, Cyborg's overweight, if she struggles to make 135. So what do you think, Jorge, of this announcement? I know we kind of disagreed on, Ronda Rousey's popularity here, but what do you think about this fight?
What did I tell you? They'd have to build up a pretty decent undercard, and so far it's one hell of an undercard, I think, man, with Lyoto Machida, Dan Henderson, and then you got Uriah and Ivan there on the undercard. It's I like the way they actually setting that up. And where is it happening? Anaheim. Where does Ronda Rousey train out of? Southern California. It's perfect, man. It's perfect. Set it up because you're going to have that following that she has in Southern California. Go to the fight. She fights with, some foreign but world-renowned boxers also. So, it's going to be, pretty good support that she's going to have. So I really like that. As far as the gifting of the championship, man, you know how I feel about that. If they would have said, all right, this Rousey and Carmouche card or the fight is for the title, by all means, feel free to win it. But just to give it to her, man, I don't like that. I have it here for this first fight. If she wins it, she wins it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. It's so with Dana White, and I again known for kind of defending him sometimes, but a lot of times, man, he gets so annoying. Like a one instance, he thinks that Strikeforce and the UFC are all one organization under Zuffa, and then in another minute, he doesn't want to sign Josh Barnett, and then he says Strikeforce is still around, even though everybody knows Strikeforce is going to die in January. I mean, it's just so frustrating kind of to see that. And I think I agree with you, Jorge. This title has no history in the UFC. This was created today. So, Carmouche has 2 wins under her belt, in a row, beating, having 2 wins, I think both of this year, one in Invicta 1 and both in Invicta 2, both against pretty decent opponents. So I think with Liz Carmouche, she's deserving of fighting, for a vacant title instead of trying to defeat a champion of an organization that's going to die in January. I don't know. I do agree with you, Jorge. In terms of promoting her, I read on Twitter that a lot of the local media weren't there to cover this. I'm not sure because this was a last-minute thing. If you hear Ronda Rousey at the press conference, she was told, that morning kind of to be there. Really, no one knew that she's going to get awarded this title, to my knowledge. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this wasn't like this was hyped for a week or so. So, yeah, it kind of worries me in kind of promoting Ronda Rousey. You would think she's the first women's champion. You would think you'd have some fanfare, maybe even give her the belt on UFC on Fox. To me, even though I kind of agree with you at a sporting aspect, from an entertainment, from a business aspect, I think that's a smart thing to do, awarding her the title, showing her highlights of Strikeforce, and just kind of making it a big deal on UFC on Fox broadcast. But it seems like they're not going to do that. So how do you think they're going to promote Ronda? It seems like Dana White's only infatuated and only in love with Ronda Rousey in terms of her being a fighter, and seems to be not really high on any other women's athletes in the sport. So what do you think?
Completely agree, but I think as he sees the popularity of this, when he sees the pay-per-view numbers for this UFC 157, success will make you love whatever it is that's making you successful, and these women are going to going to add a whole new element to the UFC and a whole new element of excitement, if you ask me, man. I think he's going to fall in love with some other fighters. Maybe he has a crazy, thing for Rousey, as you've hinted before in the past. Maybe they do have something. For him to respect the division, he has to respect everyone else besides Ronda, and I think they'll win his respect. And they'll win his respect by being successful in the pay-per-view number. So I think this UFC 157 is going to be a decent amount. I remember I told you before that I don't think she should be the main event unless they have one hell of an undercard. And I really like what they're building so far with the 2 fights that they have underneath her.
What happens if there's an injury, though? You saw this, UFC 155, Forrest is gone, Chris Weidman's gone, Gray Maynard's gone. I mean, you never know. The same thing could happen here. I mean, Dana White has done literally nothing to address this injury problem. He just kind of shrugged his shoulders and just says, it's out of my control. So what happens if, the card just goes into oblivion and then you have to trust in Ronda Rousey to totally carry that card? Can that happen? Are you worried then?
Yeah, well, obviously I am, just because of the fact, how the injury bug has been biting. But it's a new year, 2013, when this comes around. Hopefully it's, string of good luck here for the UFC. So as long as this card holds up, I think it'll be successful. And, this is a good starting point for the female MMA division in the UFC, I think. Like I said, when I told you, when you texted me that it was Liz Camosha, I was like, okay, I like it. Mm-hmm. So, definitely excited to see how it does pay-per-view numbers. What do you think it does? Just based off of what you're seeing right now, no injuries, how many did they do? Did they do at least 400?
I think it really kind of depends on the promotion. I went on ESPN's homepage, and it was on their website. I don't know how you count their website, but, ESPN's a pretty big sports website to get a lot of web traffic, and it was on there talking about Ronda Rousey with her next pay-per-view fight. I think the media is in love with her. I think if the media promotion's really good, let's say she's on ESPN, let's say she's on a couple of talk shows promoting this fight, I could see it doing $500,000. But I think at the worst, if they kind of just treat, it's Ronda Rousey and people know who she is, and they do the typical countdown special on Field TV, I could see it doing 350 to 400,000, maybe underachieving a little bit for what I think she can do. So it just depends on how they push her and how they promote her, in my opinion.
Well,
go ahead.
Man. For something like that, you know me, man. I'm a huge proponent of women's combat sports. I think they can be every bit as exciting as the male side. So, you don't have to talk to me. You don't have to talk me into believing that women belong in the UFC, because I'm completely all for it, and I want them to be successful. They just have to do it the right way for me, man.
Me too. And I just think, looking at this Invicta card, I think it's just a demonstration of you can have exciting women's fights. And I just think with Dana White, it's just annoying. This dude's just delusional and thinking that there's only one good women's fighter out there. I don't really understand what his deal is. He'll criticize Miesha Tate for her performance against Ronda Rousey, saying she's not up to her caliber, yet she puts on a classic against Julie Kedzie. What did Tate and Julie do? That was just as good as a men's fight, if not better. And he says nothing about that. So I don't know. He just seems very just in the clouds and not really focusing on the entire picture in terms of this topic. But hopefully seeing Ronda, like you said, Jorge, if the numbers prove to be spectacular with Ronda Rousey's debut, maybe he'll change his mind. I don't really know.
And since you brought up Invicta very quickly, Invicta, the FC, the X going down tomorrow. Another female fighter here who trains out of Albuquerque, Heather Jo Clark, will be on the card. So make sure you guys check her out here locally or even nationally for people listening. We have on our YouTube page, LowBlow 5 with Heather Jo Clark. She's always a pleasure to interview, so make sure you guys check that out.
And she does boxing too. She was on the Archie Ray undercard, right? That we went to? Was that her?
She was the Fidel Maldonado, wasn't it?
Fidel Maldonado. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, don't start no trouble, man. Those guys are already neck. Terrible.
So, man, we're going to not do the standing A count this week because there's just so much news. And I want to talk about your trip, Jorge, to the NYC to New York. Just a spectacular sight just watching the Miguel Cotto Austin Trout fight. It's kind of surreal. No doubt we have a personal connection with Austin Trout. It's him being on the show so many times, and it's your work, Jorge, interviewing him multiple times. But it's just really good to see Austin Trout in the spotlight. Another new rising star in the sport of boxing, getting his due. The ratings were spectacular. I think it was a little bit over 1 million in terms of views on Showtime television. That's really awesome. So, in terms of the fight, man, before I let you go, just real quickly, can you talk about the ambiance? I've heard other people say those Puerto Rican fans were really totally behind Miguel Cotto. And can you describe the early 2 rounds of the fight? Because it seemed like everybody on Twitter had Austin Trout winning those first 2 rounds. Was there any concern in the arena during the beginning of that fight that Miguel Cotto could be in trouble?
loud as they were, I'm telling you, they had several Puerto Rican fighters. I believe they had a Puerto Rican fighter or someone of Puerto Rican descent on every single one of those fights. There were about, I believe, 9 fights total. The first half of the telecast was for pay-per-view for Puerto Rico, so it was loaded with Puerto Ricans. But from the first match, you had people up in the in the top deck banging their drums, just music going off, people chanting, and then when the anticipation of the fight came, people are extremely loud. The beginning of a main event, people are just going nuts at the beginning. But when Austin Trout just set the tempo and began to outbox Miguel Cotto, you saw a lot of concern from a lot of the Puerto Rican fans. And even members of the media who had picked Cotto to win this fight easily, who didn't really know who Austin Trout was. Over the week, Trout won some of the media members over just because of how charismatic and how genuine he actually is. But as you mentioned, that crowd was pretty silent going into this end of the second round. But they picked up right in the middle of the fight where Miguel Cotto did rally in rounds 3 through 6, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe the ringside vibe when Trout got warned for hitting on the belt, right on the belt line in terms of the low blows? There's two low blows that were issued a warning by the ref, Charlie Fitch, if I'm not mistaken. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jorge, on that. But it seemed like when I was watching it seemed on Twitter when I was following it. I missed the fight. I caught the fight a day later, but following it while I was at work on break, it just seemed like all those shots were on the belt line. When I saw it, they seemed very borderline. How did you see it on ringside?
Ringside, it looked like he actually caught him there right on the belt line, but looking at the replay, it was, I guess, in the lower part of the belt line, so to where you could go either way until you could allow it or actually, score it a low blow. But I think some of Miguel Cotto's gestures, turning his head and, really grimacing from those shots made the referee think that they were a little lower than they were. Well, I mean, and who knows? From when I rewatched the fight, I didn't realize that they were wearing I believe they were wearing a special cup that they had not worn before.
Yeah, they said that on the broadcast, yeah.
What Mauro Ranallo was saying when he was announcing the fight. So I guess a little different. I mean, I don't know how you'd react to that new cup. Maybe the way it's shaped, it does hurt the jewels a little bit more. Or, you think if it were new, it were to prevent all that, right? Mm-hmm. And especially it seems strange that in a spot where he got hit, if it's a new cup, you'd think it'd prevent that type of damage. But apparently not. And, it was called fairly, I believe, by the referee. I thought it was wise for him not to take a point from Austin for the second low blow, just because of the fact that it wasn't in back-to-back rounds. It was something, I think, maybe 5 rounds apart between the 2 low blows, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. I want to kind of talk about in terms of entertainment value, because interesting, our other co-host, Will McClary, when I was texting him, he said he was kind of bored about his fight, and I was shocked. Because usually, I get pretty bored with fights if there's not enough action. But with this, I thought there was plenty of action. I don't know, maybe it's because of the personal connection with Austin Trout, but I was pretty compelled the entire way. Was there parts of this fight that people were kind of not really into what was going on? It seemed very compelling throughout the entire fight. Trout controlled the beginning, Cotto had the middle, and it seemed like Trout pulled it out in the end. It seemed very compelling throughout, very competitive, and yet, it seemed like with Will, he wasn't really into it.
Yeah, I'm sure I understand why Will was upset by it. Maybe he thought it was going to be more of a brawl, but when you have an fighter like Austin, who's more of a puncher, I guess a puncher, a boxer in a way, and Miguel Cotto, who has become that in the past, it has the recipe to possibly be a boring fight, but I think it's far from a boring fight just because of how competitive Miguel Cotto made it in the middle rounds, and that Miguel Cotto has knockout power, and you don't know how, or you didn't know at that time, how Austin Trout was going to react to it. I scored the first 2 rounds for Trout, and I'm not going to lie, as a New Mexico fight fan, I started to worry in the middle of rounds. I scored the next 4 rounds for Miguel Cotto. So going into the 7th round, I had it 4-2 Cotto, and that's where Austin just hit a different gear and started moving a little bit better after punching Cotto and being stuck on the ropes. And what surprised me is that Trout even bullied Cotto for a lot of the second half of the fight, where Cotto was backing up and he was being hurt with some shots. But from then on out, 7 through 12, I scored all for Trout. The people who had the fight for Cotto or had it even were in the minority there, even in press row. There were a couple of people. Ellie Sekback, I believe, had it even. There were a couple of riders maybe that had Cotto winning by 1 round, but most of us had Trout winning 7-5 or 8-4. So when the scores were announced, Jay, what did you honestly think? Did you think they might rob Trout?
Well, I was following this fight on Twitter again. I didn't see the fight live, but following it, I was like, man. Scott Christ, he was a writer for Bad Left Hook. He was saying that Trout needs to he's winning the fight, but he has to be spectacular in the last round. From following on Twitter, he was good, and I thought he won, but it wasn't like he was super dominant in the last round. And it just seemed like, they're going to rob him again. I don't really trust judging to begin with, let alone boxing, especially, this whole Bradley Pacquiao debacle. I for sure thought, with Pacquiao won that fight, and then Bradley had a huge, depth lead on the scorecards of the judges. So once I heard and read the scorecards, I was shocked because a lot of people on Twitter had this fight pretty close. I mean, almost, a couple of rounds up for Trout, if not, dead even heading into the last round. I think Kevin Iole had it even heading into the final round. So when I heard, especially the scorecard of Adelaide Bird 119 and 109, I thought that was a little bit ridiculous for Miguel Cotto. 117-111 with John Bertrag, and then Steve Weisfield with another 117-111 with Trout retaining his title, unanimous decision for Austin Trout. But the lopsided nature of the scores, especially in Madison Square Garden, seemed a little suspicious to me. Even though I was happy Trout won. Not going to lie.
Yeah.
I have to be honest.
A little bit different than what a lot of people expected. I mean, there were several experts that did pick Trout to actually win this fight just because of how slick he was with Dalvin Rodriguez in his last fight. And not to say Cotto has a similar style, but they're, they have the same type of fighting. But, as you mentioned, it was good to see that Austin was able to pull that off, and that New Mexico, especially the Las Cruces area, got put on the map that night. And I was worried that we as a state were going to lose, another title, man. I'm sure glad we didn't, and I'm talking about Carlos Condit losing the interim title there. So.
Well, I think with Carlos, he had nothing to be ashamed of, and if Austin Trout were to be unfortunately robbed in that situation, I don't think he wouldn't really lose too much in terms of his stature in the sport. I think people realize how serious of a fighter Austin Trout really is, and he's arrived on the scene. I want to get your take on what happened after the fight. Miguel Cotto was distraught. I don't know if you heard the Jim Gray interview that was played over the arena speakers or not, but he seemed to exit the ring right after the fight was over. Didn't really seem to want to talk to anybody. Seemed very despondent. Mauro Ranallo even suggested that, this could be Miguel Cotto's last fight ever in boxing. Was there a lot of commotion at ringside? Were the fans unruly? What was the environment there?
Well, I mean, as you know, the crowd was just shocked by not just the decision, but by the display of boxing that Austin Trout had. You may have heard maybe, if I had to put it, maybe 20 to 25 people actually even booing the decision. There was no reason to boo the decision. It was accurate, but it was just kind of like, I don't want to say that it was kind of like being at a funeral, man, but I mean it kind of was. Where just people were shocked that something happened, and it was something that wasn't supposed to happen. Who is this no-name guy coming out of Las Cruces, New Mexico, to be our hero here in his building where he was 7-0? Because a lot of people, thought Cotto in Madison Square Garden was a sure bet for a decision. A lot of people were picking him to win by knockout or decision, knowing that Austin Trout would have the odds against him. But I mean, little was the case that was going to happen. But it was kind of like being at a funeral, man, like where people were just shocked and just couldn't believe what they were actually witnessing. Their legend had actually lost to someone they probably had not heard about until the fight was announced. Because if you see a lot of our videos, man, people would comment and say, "Who is this guy?" He's Cotto's going to kill him, and it was quite opposite. So, despite the fact that he's from New Mexico, and we're tight with Austin, it's kind of good to see just the underdog come out of nowhere and be put on the map. So right now, Austin Trout's definitely the flavor of the month.
Just real quickly, man, because we have so much to talk about. One last question. It seems like Canelo Alvarez was on ringside. Austin Trout called him out. Do we see Canelo Trout, or is Canelo looking for more of a big name opponent? Hopefully, Floyd Mayweather. What's going to happen in this situation?
Well, we did have a chance to somewhat speak to Canelo at the weigh-ins. I mean, it was kind of rowdy in there, so I mean, the interviews were just in and out, just based on the fact people kept interrupting. But he did say that his next fight, he wanted Miguel Cotto or he wanted Floyd Mayweather. He wants a big money fight, he said. The Cotto fight isn't going to happen. I don't think the Mayweather fight's going to happen. If I were a betting man, this is what I'd bet. Floyd Mayweather versus Robert Guerrero, 5th of May. Floyd Mayweather versus Saul Alvarez, Canelo Alvarez, September 16th, the Independence Day weekend for Mexico.
What does Trout do? It just seems like he's the bride left at the altar. What happens to him?
Austin Trout and Miguel Cotto have a rematch clause. So if he'd like, Miguel Cotto can take the rematch clause. As far as who he can defend the title, I mean, he did mention in an interview in New York that if he fights Canelo May 5th, and I'm talking about Trout, if he fights Canelo May 5th, he's going to take a in-between fight in February. So he's probably going to fight someone in the top 15 because that's what you have to do to defend your title, and wait to see if he gets that big fight. Alvarez, he doesn't have to do anything right now. He can fight anyone in the top 15 in the WBC's ranking of the belt, and this is where boxing gets interesting, man. So I picture him fighting someone like James Kirkland or Carlos Molina, or fighting K9 Bundridge, who signed with Golden Boy and has a title at the And here's to add even further just confusion to this whole boxing thing. Alvarez might not have a mandatory challenger till next year, and that's because Vanis Martirosyan and Arislandi Lara were involved in that terrible fight that ended in a draw after Vanis's eye was actually cut. So those guys still have to fight to determine who the mandatory challenger for Saul Canelo Alvarez is. So Alvarez can pretty much call his own shots for the meantime.
Wow, you're giving me a headache.
Boxing in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow. So let's shift to MMA because that seems a little bit more clear. And we have a big UFC on Fox card this weekend. The main event, Benson Henderson, Nate Diaz. Co-main event will be Shogun Rua, Alexander Gustafsson. BJ Penn will face Rory McDonald. Mike Swick will face Matt Brown. Now fill out the main card on Fox. I don't know if you caught the Road to the Octagon special on Fox. It was right before the NFL. Jorge, I don't know if you caught that or not. Did you?
I did not, man. I think I was flying.
Oh, that's right, you were. It's on YouTube now. You should really check it out. Really, really good documentary. And it's just this kind of content that I think, we should be seeing all the time on either FX or on Fox, that the casual fan can really understand these guys' stories from a personal perspective. And I think, just watching that special and breaking down this card, it really, in terms of the 3 fights, really made each guy stand out. Before we break down the main card, I want to be remiss of it and mention this. There are 2 Jackson's fighters on the preliminary card. Henry Martinez will fight Darren Cruikshank, and I take that back. Tim Means will fight Abel Trujillo, and then Henry Martinez will fight Darren Cruikshank. So those are 2 fights to really take a hold of. I know, Jorge, you interviewed Tim Means' wife. I think, doesn't she have a fight coming up too?
She actually fought this past weekend. She's the King of Junior Flyweight champion, and she won by knockout. So.
Oh, wow, okay.
She's undefeated, man. She's actually pretty good. She's a boxer also who's undefeated. So, I mean, definitely keep your eye out on Brenda Gonzalez. So that's Tim Means' fiance. I also had a chance to interview Tim Means. We all met up together. So it's a power couple, man. You definitely do not want to mess with them.
No doubt. In terms of the main card, I want to focus on the BJ Penn-Rory McDonald fight. Really, in terms of, this fight, this seems to be a saga from the VADA testing, from the eye cut Rory McDonald suffered, to Rory McDonald's fashion sense, to BJ Penn crying about his daughter on the Road to the Octagon special. In terms of the legacy of BJ Penn, the main thing of this fight is BJ Penn thinks no one's going to remember him. That he's a forgotten legend of the past, and now no one really takes him seriously as one of the greatest fighters in the history of MMA in his mind. In terms of this fight, I mean, it just seems like Rory McDonald. People have either said he's boring or he's really fascinating because he just has a unique personality. But I guess where I'm getting at in terms of this fight, it seems like Rory McDonald, if I'm not mistaken, in his last fight, I think it was with trying to look it up with Che Mills. He did get the victory there, but I think he had some trouble in the stand-up. BJ Penn gets off to quick starts. Is there any possibility we could see kind of a first-round finish from BJ? I mean, Rory McDonald, this is a high-pressure situation. This is the biggest name he's fought, I think, in my opinion, his entire UFC career. The most high-profile card on national television. Could you see a really dramatic upset resulting in kind of the hype train of Rory McDonald ending, to Saturday night?
I definitely think so, and it's because of, Penn, he's dangerous on the ground. I mean, he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so... And he's not a bad boxer either, but when it comes to Rory, I mean, his striking is incredible. He pounded Carlos Condit pretty good in the stand-up and on the ground game. So, as you mentioned, he is a slow starter. And I think, he might be able to Penn might be able to pull that upset. I'm going with Rory, but the odds makers in Vegas just slightly have BJ Penn at 2-1 underdog, but they have Rory at 3-1 favorite. So if it were boxing, those are pretty good odds. Those are pretty close odds. But in MMA, it's quite distant. I think Rory McDonald is going to be able to weather the storm. Just because of the fact and I go back to Condit, but Condit is a completely different fighter. But I don't know if Penn has, I guess, the ability to last that long with Rory.
I don't think so. I think conditioning, I've always liked BJ better at 155. I've always maintained that. I just think he has better conditioning. I just think with Frankie Edgar, he had his number. I think everybody freaked out that, BJ Penn is a crap lightweight because he lost to Frankie Edgar twice. That's kind of ridiculous thinking to me. I just think, that's his weight class. That's where we've seen BJ Penn the most conditioned, and Frankie Edgar just has his number and fought better than him during at least the rematch. And so at 170, I just think we've seen BJ run out of gas. And I think with Rory McDonald, he's too big, like you said, man. I think the boxing, I think it's going to be a real difference in this fight. I think if BJ can keep it standing for a first round and a half, I think he can stop Rory McDonald. I think there's a good possibility. But if this fight hits the ground, believe it or not, I know what you're saying about BJ Penn's skills and credentials on the ground game. I mean, those are already, stated already. There's no introduction needed for BJ Penn's ground game. But Rory McDonald's just so big and just so physical. I just think he'll just wear out BJ Penn and break as well. We've seen BJ Penn break in the octagon many of times. And I think Rory McDonald has the strength and power to do that. That's why I'm picking Rory McDonald. I think, third round probably stoppage. I think he'll go too, but I think it'll be close, and I think Rory McDonald will overwhelm him. But I think that fight's really interesting to see. Either way, whoever wins, I think is really compelling. Since we only got a little bit of time here, man, just real quickly, Shogun versus Alexander Gustafsson. Gustafsson really getting a lot of momentum despite, getting submitted by Phil Davis. He's been on a 5 winning streak, and now he's going to be facing Shogun, who in the biggest fight of his career. Is Gustafsson for real? I mean, Shogun, the one thing about Shogun is, he's a Terminator. He's extremely difficult to finish. Who do you have taking this one?
As much as, Shogun is one of my heroes in the sport, especially because of, that stand-up he has, I think I'm going Gustafsson, man. I think he's going to be able to stop him. I guess early second, I think, is actually where he's going to go. Just his boxing and jiu-jitsu is good enough, I think, to be able to take Shogun down, man. It's you can tell by my voice that it's actually what I think. I mean, Shogun to me is one of the greatest fighters of all time in my mind, and one of my personal favorites. But I think just the younger Gustafsson, only 25 years old. This guy's on fire right now. I don't think Shogun's going to have enough to stop him.
Yeah, I think I really want to pick Shogun, to be 100% honest with you. But I just think the way he looked against Brandon Vera, it's like Brandon Vera, granted he fought probably the best fight of, in years against Shogun. But I think Shogun kind of fought to his level of competition. And I think with Gustafsson, he's such a technical striker. Because to me, Shogun, I think, has a lot of toughness and a lot of perseverance and experience factor might go in. But again, he's had conditioning issues and I think a lot of injuries. I got to pick Gustafsson. I think the fight will be close, but I got to go with Alexander Gustafsson. The main event, Nate Diaz, Benson Henderson for the lightweight title. It just seems like, it's interesting at the press conference, Jorge, I don't know if you caught this. It seemed like Nate Diaz would just say 3 words, not even put a full sentence together, and the crowd would go ballistic. They would chant, they would clap, they would just go nuts for the guy. And whenever Ben Henderson talked, there was no response. It was like no one cared. It's just amazing, to see kind of Nate Diaz just, literally being himself and people just be infatuated with this guy. And with Benson Henderson, he's the models. He wears a suit to the press conference, models citizen, does everything right, and just he gets no really love from the fans.
Very religious as well. I mean, how opposite could these guys be?
I'm sorry? I didn't catch that.
How opposite could these guys be from one another?
Oh, I think so too. I think their fighting styles are quite the opposite. I mean, Benson Henderson said they both come forward, but they come forward in very different ways and have very different styles of dominating their opponent. I think this fight is very interesting because really with Frankie Edgar, he's like Benson Henderson said, he's really elusive. And with Nate Diaz, he throws massive combinations. That's what I love about the Diaz brothers. They throw combinations. That's one pet peeve I have with MMA fighters a lot of the time is that a lot of them, you don't see them throwing a lot of combinations. I think the Diaz brothers, their punch count is just ridiculous. It seems like every single fight they break, all kinds of CompuStrike records. Just, you hear Joe Rogan just saying, here's another, they hold the record for most strikes in a single round. I'm sure Erica will correct me in that, but I think the Diaz brothers are definitely in the running, I have to guess. But in terms of this fight, do you see Benson Henderson ultimately wearing Nate Diaz down? I think, we know Benson Henderson for his reputation for getting out of submissions and surviving in bad spots. And Nate Diaz, his forte, one of his strengths is submissions. This fight's very close on paper. Who do you think will take it?
Man, it's a tough one. I honestly think it's a toss-up. Between both of them, they both have. Benson Henderson. He cut some slack for not being too exciting. He waits a lot for his punches to time them. But Nate Diaz is going to take this fight to him, and anything Nate Diaz is doing, it's going to be exciting. Whether it's reading a book or whether it's talking to someone. But Jay, never done this before. Heads, Nate Diaz, tails Henderson. Let's go.
You're flipping a coin.
Benson Henderson, man, and I think to outwear him. I don't know how Henderson is actually going to do. If he gets caught in one of those submissions, if it's, a guillotine or a triangle, it's going to be very interesting to see how he weathers those storms. But I think Benson Henderson will be able to wear him down. But literally, I think that fight is actually a toss-up. Out of all the fights on the card, that's the one I think could go absolutely either way.
I agree with you. It's really close. I'll go Nate Diaz. I think I like the combinations a lot. I think another factor is going to be the wrestling. I think you saw, even Benson Henderson, and Nate Diaz is the bigger guy, but Benson Henderson, you see his thighs. He has really massive thighs, really built guy, kind of like a running back. And I think, the takedowns could be a factor with the wrestling advantage of Benson Henderson, but I don't know. I like the combinations of Nate Diaz. I think on damage, I think he'll be able to personally land the most amount of shots on Benson Henderson. I don't think we've ever seen Benson Henderson cut. I could be wrong on that too, but to my recollection in the WEC, we haven't seen him really bleed all too much. I think that could happen with Nate Diaz. I see Nate Diaz winning a decision. I like him in that fight. I think it's really close. I definitely could be wrong, but this would be contrarian, and I like Nate Diaz's style. I'll go Nate Diaz.
Okay, and the only difference is, he has 2 losses, Benson Henderson. One was by submission way back in 2007, man. So that doesn't apply to him possibly being submitted. And then he lost by decision, Anthony Pettis. The only one, out of his past fights, is Miller, Guida, and then Edgar twice. I guess Jim Miller would be the only one known as a submission specialist, because most of his victories have come by, submission, and Benson Henderson did pretty well against him. So, completely different fighter, Nate Diaz, but I think Henderson will be able to pull a decision.
Mm-hmm. Just real quickly, and we'll probably break this down more in depth next week, but just because we're short on time, but I do want to get this in. Dana White seemed to announce tentatively that George St. Pierre will fight Nick Diaz whenever Nick Diaz gets off suspension. What are your thoughts on this fight? I know Johnny Hendricks has been really angry on Twitter. Jake Shields, really, calling Johnny Hendricks, telling him not to complain about getting a title shot. This thing's really blown up all over Twitter. Dana White has said that, Johnny Hendricks is not entitled to a title shot, even though Hendricks has destroyed some of the best in the welterweight division. What are your thoughts on, Nate Diaz coming off a loss and a suspension getting a title shot here, perhaps?
I mean, it's a fight that a lot of MMA fans wanted to happen. Carlos Condit pulled off that decision against Diaz. People were upset. They still wanted to see GSP Diaz. It was a fight that was supposed to happen before the Condit one, but unfortunately, Pierre did get injured. And I'm not as pumped about the super fight between Silva and GSP as everyone else is. As I've said here times before, I think it's a mismatch. It all depends on the weight that's going to happen. But if St. Pierre has to go up, I think he's at a disadvantage either way. So I actually don't mind seeing this fight. It kind of sucks for Johnny Hendricks, but as you mentioned, that Dana White's saying that Johnny Hendricks really doesn't deserve anything. I mean, even though
he's not entitled to anything. That's his words.
He's not entitled to anything. So
yep.
I actually don't mind seeing this fight because I'm personally not. I mean, it's great for the sport if Silva and GSP were to fight, but I'm not all in for it, to be honest. For that.
Agreed. I think a lot of people feel that way. I guess I'll say my thoughts for next week, but I would say that it's a disservice to the sport that this GSP Nate Diaz fight is happening. And I know people like to fight from a on paper standpoint, but I don't know. It just seems like a guy who misses press conference, a guy who gets paused for a drug test, doesn't deserve anything to me. And he's going to have to earn his way up to the top. But, I'll get into that more next week. We have to talk. I know we only have 5 more minutes, Jorge, but it's Juan Manuel Marquez against Manny Pacquiao for the 4th time. Should people care about this fight? I mean, what is the value to? They're going to see the pay-per-view commercials on their, cable, providers around the country. They're going to see this and they're going to fight for the 4th time. Is there any value to this fight if Marquez wins? I mean, if Marquez gets, I guess you would say, even though to me I thought the last fight, the 3rd fight they had was a definitive win for Marquez. Marquez gets robbed of the decision. I guess if Marquez knocks out Manny Pacquiao, does this mean that the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight's over with? I mean, what does this fight mean towards the future for both guys, do you think, real quickly?
It's very strange. I mean, Manny Pacquiao does not want to fight Timothy Bradley again. The only fight that makes sense is for him and Floyd Mayweather, unless, he fights a young guy like Robert Guerrero. Robert Guerrero is now a player in that 147 class. He's no joke. He's a legitimate 147-pounder. So to see Manny Pacquiao, Robert Guerrero, that'd be great, but Robert Guerrero doesn't have the name. Juan Marquez, I mean, he's 39 years old. He doesn't have many fights left, and especially in that division he's in, actually on his way out, because you got guys like Danny Garcia, Lucas Matisse, Brandon Rios, and and up and coming, Zab Judah's getting a little older, but I'll put him as a player in there also. It's just, at that age, despite the fact that he's one of the greatest counterpunchers of all time, might be a little difficult going against these guys that are 10, 15 years younger. In Danny Garcia's case, to fight. We'll see how he performs in this. If he wins this, Jay, they're going to have a 5th fight. They will have a 5th fight. I just know it. And most of us believe that the first fight was probably even. I may have given a slight edge to Pacquiao in that first fight, despite of the crazy comeback Marcus had. The next 2 fights, I think, to me, Marcus won both of them. He got robbed, or he didn't get the decision, if you will, depending on the side of the aisle that you're actually on. But if Marcus wins, they'll have a fight, man. And if he loses, then either Marcus goes into retirement, he fights a guy like Danny Garcia or Lucas Matisse, or maybe even Brandon Rios just to set him up for a final payday against a young up-and-coming fighter that they're trying to develop. But Manny Pacquiao, it's still in limbo. We don't know exactly what they're going to try to do with him, just because of the fact he doesn't have too many guys. But I mean, here's BoxRec's top 5. Timothy Bradley's not going to fight him. Pacquiao's 2. Robert Guerrero, possibly. Devin Alexander, no. Devin Alexander, Pacquiao would be a boring fight. And Kell Brook, who's on fire right now from the United Kingdom, very exciting fighter. He's fighting Devin Alexander. So he has to get past Devin to even be considered for a Manny Pacquiao fight. I don't think he will, just because he does not have a name in the United States. So it's either going to be Robert Guerrero, win or lose, or Floyd Mayweather, which, we know that's been up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Well, it just seems like, we might see Vinny Marquez Pac-Man fights as Rocky movies. So we'll see what this.
There was a logo that someone created a couple of days ago where they have both guys aged, and it says something like 2037, Pacquiao Marquez 50, or something.
It could be
posted on the YouTube page, and I know we might go, but just one more thing. It's pretty big news here locally. I guess it's breaking news that we have here. There is an event being planned to be set up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that will bring ESPN Friday Night Fights January 11th here to Santa Fe. So Santa Fe just a drive up from here. And that's actually going to be held at the Pueblo Pavilion at Santa Fe Indian School. So it's a brand new high school gym that they have out there, but it's a beautiful facility. So, sources here are telling us that January 11th looks like it's a done deal for ESPN2's fights to actually bring. There's some younger guys from Albuquerque that might be on the card, but the main headlining, the main card headlining it is John Molina Jr., who's a pretty good fighter, a lightweight, against Danny Williams. So it's going to be, pretty good for the region, and interesting that they're having it in Santa Fe, but, I don't mind doing the 40-minute drive out there to catch an ESPN event, man.
No doubt, but we got to go. FightFans Radio, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Ustream. At the LowBlow through Twitter. Facebook is LowBlow Radio, and lowblow505@gmail.com. For Justin Goodrum, for myself, Justin Goodrum, that's Jorge Hernandez. We'll see you next week.
Peace.